In our new series, And Then What?, we're following up on news headlines that you read, but then maybe you don't hear much about afterwards. This month, we're talking public lands sell-off. What's happening? How can you help? We break down the process and how you can have an impact. Stay tuned after the episode to hear our latest edition of And Then What? The Diaries is supported by Trail Angels. A lot of us have been there. Something goes wrong. It rains for 5 straight days while we're on the trail. Someone slips, needs some stitches, and the world seems to know it. A trail angel swoops in and makes a tough situation better. Trail magic is an incredible thing to witness and feel. And right now there is a global network of trail angels, aka Diaries Plus members, that power this project and help us bring our show to 100,000 subscribers. A few people are going a little out of their way to make something incredible happen. And it's easy to be a part of and ensure that we keep doing our best work. You join the Diaries, you become part of a movement, and you keep this project running for this generation of thru hikers and dirtbags and the next. So if this show has helped you out, it's helped you see a path through life, help you make a change or chase a dream, please consider doing the same for others. The link is in the show notes, or you can find it on our website. Spread the love, give a little trail magic, support the Diaries Plus.
Years ago, barely 10, I sat perched up on a telephone book in the front passenger seat of a tan 90 Chevy 4-door, Johnny Cash on the radio, and a mug of cereal spilling over into the cup holder. Our hunting truck sped along, full of our annual traditions. Dad and I were 20 miles into our drive for opening day of fishing season, when the hiss of a trailer tire started to hum over Folsom Prison Blues. We pulled aside to see our trusty 13-foot aluminum bass boat was dragging lopsided down the dirt road on a bum trailer. This rusty rig was instrumental in transporting us to our favorite places. Each spring, Dad would stock it with tackle boxes, a disposable camera, and more poles than people to teach me how to pocket cast over bass in the Penobscot River of Maine. Each fall, I'd stand tall off the bow to measure how much I'd grown that summer. How else was he supposed to customize the PVC pipe duck blind that he installed each season? Ahead of every trip, he'd painstakingly touch up chips in the paint with camo spray and remind me that I wasn't allowed to paint my fingernails all season. "Can't let the birds see us from the sky," he'd say. With our favorite vessel pitched askew on a bum trailer, I knew that the boat would be coming with us, even if the trailer wasn't. Dad shut off the radio and instructed me to stay put. He removed $100 from his billfold, locked the door, and set off on foot down the Glenburn Road. Not 15 minutes had passed before the rear view revealed the tip of his head sitting in the driver's seat of a different white truck. We muscled our boat into the 8-foot bed, and I hopped in the front seat of a stranger's musty truck, engulfed in the smell of their Altoids and cigarettes. I hardly batted an eye. This was just how my dad was. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, stood in the way of this man and our commitment to spending time outside together. My dad was the architect of my childhood memories, and in turn it raised me to pay attention to my environment. Days of my life have been spent sitting in a hand-built turkey blind, waiting for that first gobble, floating over rocky passages of Maine rivers to get to the most pristine and secret fishing holes, drinking hot chocolate and eating cereal in the most rural of places, because my dad never forgot the snacks. He shouldered the burden of packing lists, the 3 a.m. alarms, and the endless repair of gear before I learned to flip the bail on the fishing rod, forming a tangle that he'd spend all night undoing. He made the logistics happen so that I could sit back and learn. Because of that, I know that owls and crows squawk first, then the turkeys come down from their roost. How to identify different critters by their tracks in the mud, and how to ethically unhook a smallmouth bass, pickerel, or trout, because he always caught and released to get bigger next year, he'd say. With his own history of having to grow up too soon, my dad committed his time in fatherhood to engineer an unforgettable childhood for both of us. The adventures and misadventures have continued to follow us another few decades. We've chased halibut the size of barn doors off the Baranof Islands, bluefin marlin off the Baja Peninsula, and orange-gilled Colorado cutthroat. I've since moved 5,000 miles away to Alaska and have shared some of the most pristine and wild fishing waters with my dad on the net. Our trusty aluminum boat sits safely at home in Maine, but we've added an 18-foot blue fishing raft to the adventure fleet. Roles reversed, I've learned to row the glacial rivers of Alaska with my dad casting off the bow. Not too much has changed, though. To this day, he remains the master problem solver of our family. Just last winter, we plotted a bucket list fishing trip with my uncles to the legendary waters of Magdalena Bay in Mexico. The night before our trip, we discovered a snag in passport logistics. According to our passport card, we could walk or sail into Mexico, but not enter by air. Dad took not much time to deliberate before he called to say, "Oh, we'll just walk across the border in Tijuana. No big deal." So walking across the border, we went. From Alaska to San Diego, an Uber to the Mexican border, one scan of our card, and an $89 domestic flight into Little Cabo. At the end of our trip, we reversed the same itinerary, but this time with 300 pounds each of mahi, tuna, and marlin wheeling behind us in coolers. Let the girl go fishing, I thought, as I walked across the border with a successful bounty at my feet. Dad and I look forward to the last week of July every year, his annual migration to Alaska. On the turquoise waters of the Kenai River, we have what's called combat fishing, where tourists and locals alike flock to the water to reel in 8 to 10 pound sockeye salmon for their dinner table. At the first sign of the salmon run, we sprint down to the gravel bar to catch our own freezer full. Weights go whipping by your head, sand spits up to fill your eyebrow, and blood squirts your cheek while you corral a flopping life to shore. It's a blessing and a workout. In preparation of Dad landing at the airport the following morning, I set out to scope our favorite gravel bar with a couple of friends. We rigged up our lines in the parking lot, waded through the hip-high silty water, and claimed our turf on the sandy edge just as we'd done 100 times prior. The fishing started off slowly as we waited for the salmon to move up the river. My best pal Elena stood to my left, the first one to link up with a fish. She reeled while I chased its tail through the murky water. Once it sucked into the net, we dragged it to the shore. That was one. 5 more to go before she had her limit. Because salmon travel in fast-moving groups, it wasn't long until I linked up myself. With every catch, the work restarted, batting the salmon on the skull and pulling their gills with your fingers before adding them to a stringer of rope that's tied to a nearby tree. We went on like this into the late afternoon, fish traveling in bursts over our shoelaces while we worked to fill our limit side by side. As the sun shifted behind a cloud, I moved my sunglasses to the top of my hat to get a better view of a knot that I was retying. I sent a few casts with a new knot and quickly made contact with another fish. If we got this one to shore, we'd be wrapping up to go home soon. Elena on the net, the drag spooled in my hands while I kept tight tension to the rod. She lunged toward my fish. I took a step backward to tighten the line. The fish came off abruptly, and the sinker weight at the end of my own rod came flying back at me. When the weight struck my temple, I knew it was going to be more than an inconvenience. Adrenaline at the wheel, I abandoned my fishing bag and stringer of fish and held pressure to my throbbing head, forging through 3/4 mile water back to the truck. I curled up in the passenger seat. One of the first calls was my dad. I watched my ivory microgrid fleece turn a deep red in my lap. I listened while Elena answered Dad's logistic questions. Which hospital? How close were we? He'd be along in a few hours to help. She's going to be okay. And where were her sunglasses? The hospital spent 2 full days triaging the impact with the help of many doctors across several departments. What followed was a major hemorrhage, 3 months of bed rest, monthly eye injections, hundreds of specialists, and lots of travel to get their respective opinions. At every ophthalmologist's office, my legs sticking to their leather chair, I've heard, "Wow, a direct bullseye hit," or "Do you mind if we bring our students in? This is extremely rare." And at the best hospital in Boston, where no one has ever heard of combat fishing, "So you got hit by a big fish?" Close, but not quite. Unsurprisingly, once Dad landed in Alaska the day after the accident, he didn't leave my side for nearly 2 months. He sharpened his cooking skills to follow my tumultuous cravings, help support my incredible husband, and exercise my beloved rescue dog Indy while I rested off migraine after migraine. To our bewilderment, he spent 2 weeks with a chainsaw and clippers building us a backyard half-mile trail for when I was ready to be more mobile. He flattened every stump and cut every tree at eye level for ease, and I've walked it every single day since recovery began. Shortly after I convinced Dad to return home to Maine, the pressure in my healing eye began to elevate rapidly. Without an available surgeon in Alaska, I boarded a red-eye flight to Boston for an emergency surgery the morning that I arrived. The healing restarted again, but this time in my home state of Maine. I spent another few weeks lying horizontally at my parents' camp and eagerly awaiting the medical clearance for light, upright activity. Determined to get back behind the rod, our first big outing was my favorite lake in Maine. We slowly trolled for kokanee, a landlocked species of salmon. Dad packed a comfy chair, eye protection, snacks, and a Corona for himself. I sat back and left the tackle rigging to him while I soaked up the late September sunset. By this point, no eye patch interfering, I spent the boat ride squinting back and forth from left eye to right eye, metabolizing the complete loss of input to one side. It was distorted darkness. The conversation while we trolled was sparse, but the tension in the humid air was palpable while we waited for that first bite. The line tipped, and Dad stood to help me set the hook. Let the girl go fishing, I thought, as I reeled through a couple of tears off the stern of the boat. An East Coast salmon on the end of my line, one of the many firsts to come as a new visually impaired person. Ultimately, my dad is motivated by the same thing that he always has been. He's made the outdoors an inclusive and welcoming place for me to return to. He was back in the same role he'd had when I was 10 years old, putting the logistics and tools together to reduce the barrier of entry. He's helped me rebuild my confidence physically and mentally, and helped demonstrate that I still have a home in the wild spaces that helped to raise me. We've learned together that no $100 truck rental, U-Haul car hauler, or international border can heal a macular cortical rupture, just our own journey to acceptance to forge through together. I'm less than a year into healing and still picking up the pieces of what relearning and rebalancing looks like, for both the sport and my daily life. There may be no solution to my new visual impairment. There's certainly no magic wand for walking you through to the acceptance of it either. Some days I find myself in the thick of it, and I remind myself that healing is nonlinear in nature. What's been comforting through the grief and change is the one constant of returning to the familiar safety of the outdoors. How easy it is to practice gratitude for my amplified other senses. How hearing the loon's hollow call from our back deck is more brilliant than ever. How fast our brains can adapt, overcome pain, and adjust to new sensations. Most of all, how grateful I am to have a dad who taught me the magic of it all to begin with, and how someday I hope to be that kind of mentor for somebody else who needs it. Love you, Dad. Thank you. My name is Meg Morris, and this is my short.
After the break, Emmye Vernet takes us to the sun-baked sandy cliffs and canyons of the American Southwest, where she has a showdown with fear. The Diaries is supported by Oboes. At Oboes, it's all about hiking and the passion for moving your body in nature. Their name Oboes is actually a fun little contraction of outside Bozeman, which is where the team works and creates. They use the mountains as a natural laboratory. While big shoe companies chase volume and trends and gimmicks, Oboz has stayed on trail and on point, refining and building the perfect tools for bipedal travel right in their backyard. If you've got a big summer ahead, check out the Bridger Ridge, their updated take on a classic leather hiker. I've been rocking the Catabatic LT out in the woods. It's a rugged sneaker style built for moving quickly, even when I'm not. Oboz footwear. Love hiking. All right, I have been waiting for a really long time for the sun to come out here in the Pacific Northwest. We got like a little blip a few weeks ago and then went away, but it's coming. I know it. And I know when it shows up, I'll put on sunscreen and then I'll immediately sweat it off and then I'll get sunburned because like I haven't seen the sun in like 9 months or something. And when my skin gets redder or burned or windburned, that's when I use Mayday After Sun Cream from Terns. Mayday is designed for when you've been overexposed to the elements, and I'm sure a lot of you out there can relate. It has 3 times Terns' special marine-derived complex that speeds up skin regeneration and healing. It helps minimize peeling and replenishes moisture, and that makes my skin look better, feel better, quicker. When there's so many things to think about, having a go-to product that's good for my skin is awesome. I put it on at night, go to bed, don't think about it, super easy. After Sun shouldn't be an afterthought. Use the code DIRTBAG to get 25% off your first order at Terns.com. We'll put a link in the show notes and you can try Terns for yourself. Check it out.
After hauling our way through the desert trail, skin baked from the piercing midday Utah spring sun, Rose and I had finally made it to the entrance of the Slot Canyon. This was our long-awaited moment, the whole reason we came out to Escalante in the first place. We'd put good time into figuring out how to make this trip out west happen, and whenever logistics made us ambivalent about getting out here, Rose would show me a picture of this very place and insist, I mean, look, we have to go. And now, here we were, off the computer screen, across the country, through the dry and scorching desert, at last standing in front of the place we'd been dreaming about. I looked over at Rose, blue eyes that had been squinted to bear the bright sun now open wide, taking in the enormity of the canyon before us with awe. For her, that tiny, dark, vertical crack in the canyon wall and the tall climb to the inside of it was a thrilling and glorious challenge. She looked over at me, and I could tell that she knew immediately that I was having a reaction that was entirely the opposite. She was right. I was terrified. Rose and I met nearly a decade earlier on the first day of college. We hit it off immediately, bonding over the fact that we both played music, both landed jobs at the university's recycling center, and had both signed up for the same first-year cohort class. She was warm, friendly, and thoughtful. We seemed to be very similar. But it didn't take too long to discover that we also had some major differences. Rose was raised in a mountain town in western Maine by parents who had moved there to work at Outward Bound. Her dad now ran an outdoor outfitting shop in town, and he and her mom had instilled in Rose a love of all things adventure. She grew up cross-country skiing, rock climbing, mountain biking, ice skating, and her favorite, hiking. When Rose graduated high school, her and her sister hiked the Long Trail, a 3-week backpacking trip which, as she told me that first week of college, consisted of 15-plus-mile days and subsistence almost exclusively from peanut butter. "You slept in a tent?" I asked one day as she showed me pictures of the trip. "Hiked all day in the pouring rain? Never showered?" Rose laughed. "It's actually really fun," she insisted. "One day I'll show you." I couldn't believe that anyone would willingly choose to do that. Not only was I from a small, mountain-free town in southeastern Connecticut where I'd never met anyone who regularly backpacked, I was also simply a terrified person. I failed out of preschool gymnastics because I was too scared to do a cartwheel, and I was the only one to get cut from my middle school basketball team because I was afraid of the ball. Probably a good reason to get cut. When I became the first person in the history of our public high school crew team to catch an ejector crab, which is when you literally get ejected from the boat and thrown out into the water, my suspicions were confirmed. It was all much too scary. Best not to push it. Throughout those 4 years of college, Rose tried her hardest to pull me out of my fear. She brought me rock climbing, on hikes with the outing club, and back to her childhood home in Maine to go cross-country skiing. I'd go with her, begrudgingly, sometimes giving in and joining her on the hike, sometimes pitching a hammock at the base of the rock face while she took herself bouldering. Surely I was not the easiest adventure buddy, and Rose had plenty of other friends who had the athletic expertise to match her own. But she kept inviting me outside, reaching out her hand to help me down a rocky scramble or over a river crossing, patient as ever. Though I never craved the excursions quite as much as she did, over time I did start to love the feeling of being outside, my feet on the ground, fresh air in my lungs, and the sound of bird songs. By the time we graduated college and moved to the Pacific Northwest, I'd softened to the fact that accompanying Rose on these adventures was probably par for the course if we were to keep living our lives together. And more than anything, that's what I wanted. After our stint in the Pacific Northwest came to a COVID halt, Rose and I eventually found ourselves back on the East Coast and living together in the most unlikely of places, New York City. Though outdoor adventure was a bit harder to access here, though not impossible, the abundance of queers and leftists filled up both of our cups, and we came into ourselves more than ever. It was there, amidst the brownstones and barbed wire, that Rose and I finally admitted to each other what we had probably long been denying. We were in love. In this moment of immense change, Rose and I decided that we needed to take a trip outdoors together to connect with each other the best way we knew how. Rose's parents had recently come back from a trip to the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah and raved about how much we would love it. The big desert skies, ancient rocky canyons, and treks through the heavy sand. And their favorite part of the trip, the part they were sure would blow us away, were the slot canyons, peekaboo and spooky. Rose and I got to researching and agreed that, why not? Escalante seemed like the spot. We mapped out the cheapest possible way to Utah, and just a few months later, we were there. March 2024. We set up camp at Calf Creek Falls in the belly of Grand Staircase Escalante. On the first day, we hiked the trail directly from the campground, a simple but necessary 6-mile acclimation to the springtime desert heat. We felt good, rejoicing in the magnitude of the canyon surrounding us, the feeling of a dry air sweat, and how grateful we were to be on this adventure with each other. And I was actually enjoying the fact that we were hiking. I felt confident, strong, and capable as I kept up with Rose's stride. The trail culminated at a beautiful waterfall, a narrow and elegant beam that shot down from a couple 100 feet up the canyon ledge. We took off our backpacks and admired the view. Maybe, I thought to myself, I've finally conquered my fears. Maybe from here, everything's easy. The next day, we drove to the Peekaboo Spooky Trailhead. It was hotter than it had been the day before, well over 100 degrees, and it felt like the entire desert was blanketed by the sun's strongest possible rays. The parking lot had just one other car and a sign that read, "Warning, Slot Canyon extremely narrow." We hiked through the desert trail, the dunes and cacti and packed dirt floor charming us all the way until we finally arrived at the base of Peekaboo, a 15-foot climb up into a dark and narrow crack in the middle of a massive canyon. This is what we're doing? I felt my heart start pounding in my chest. I looked over to Rose, whose eyes were shining with excitement. When she saw my expression, her look turned to one of reassurance. "Don't worry, Em," she promised. "We've got this." We went closer to the rock face and inspected the holds for the climb in, of which there were very few. Rose started charting out a path to get up and admitted that it would be a bit tougher than she realized. My head started spinning. I've never done anything like this before. What if I can't pull my own body weight? What if I get claustrophobic in there and start panicking? What if I ruin this whole trip? Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a young family came up behind us, snapping me out of my self-deprecation. We said our hellos and moved aside so that they could assess the climb for themselves. As the father and mother pointed upwards towards the canyon and lay their hands atop the rock, I could tell that they too were surprised by the challenge. "A little tricky, huh?" said the father, laughing. Rose and I concurred. The mother called her 2 sons back from over the dunes, and just like that, the family lined up and scaled the rock face one by one, the father first, and the youngest son, who was maybe 8, last. There was some slipping, pausing, and heavy breathing, but nobody complained. I thought about what I would have been like at the age of 8, surely in tears and begging my parents to turn us around. But this kid didn't flinch, and in fact, when he made it to the top, he started dancing. The family gave us a wave goodbye and headed into the canyon. "Well, what do you think?" Rose finally asked. I took a deep breath. "I think I'm as ready as I'll ever be." We decided I'd go up first. I placed my foot in the hairline of a hold and gripped my fingers in the only crevice I could see. My chest was still pounding, but my legs felt stable. My arms felt strong. "You've got this, Em," Rose cheered from below. Up I went, one hold to the next, legs sturdy, arms engaged. Before I knew it, I had made it up the climb and into the canyon. Rose applauded and scurried up next to me. We laughed. "You know," I said, "that was actually kind of fun." From there, the hike through Peekaboo and Spooky was epic. We slid our way through the tiny crevices, sat in the bony caves, hoisted ourselves through climbs up and down and around this rocky landscape. And I didn't feel claustrophobic, I felt enchanted. It didn't feel like work, it felt like play. I felt the smallness of my fear. I felt myself lose my worries to the sand beneath me. I let the winding canyon path shape me into something new. "This is so beautiful," Rose and I repeated back to each other. All those years of telling myself that I couldn't, it turned out that I could. All those years of telling myself that I didn't want it, it turned out that I did. Later that night, back in our tent at Calf Creek, I cried to Rose as the rain fell overhead. But these were not tears of sadness, they were tears of immense joy. Life has a way of changing us, even when we're afraid of that change. I never thought I'd be someone who felt strong in her body, who enjoyed a challenge, who wanted to be outside. I never thought I'd call Rose my girlfriend. I never thought I'd be someone who saw what was on the other side of her fear. But there I was, in a sleeping bag at the edge of a Utah creek, nestled under big and magnificent canyons, curled up with the love of my life, having completed an adventure that was beyond anything I could have imagined myself doing. I was sleepy, bruised, and filled with a love I was only beginning to touch. For my own strength, for Rose, for the canyons, for the enormity and mystery of this life. My name is Emmye Vernet, and this is my short.
Thanks, Emmye and Meg, for sharing your stories. Our stories come from friends of friends, and you, our community. If you have a compelling idea for a guest or a story lead, please give us a shout and email us at editor@ducktapethenbeer. Thanks to the folks who have recently become Diaries Plus members. It makes a huge difference. And to those that continue to support it, you give everyone access to the show, and we would not be here without you. Please, if you're considering, we need it now more than ever. Thank you so much, everyone. Music today from Saxons, Tigers in the Sky, David Swinson, JT Ruff, Topo Azul, Roma 49, Smoke M2D6, Amico Mio, and Brennan O'Connell. The tracks are courtesy of the artists or Track Club. Jacob Bain and Nis Cotto composed our theme song. You can find the artists at our website, dirtbagdiaries.com. This episode was produced by Skylar Perwins with additional production help from Becca Cahal. Illustration by Walker Call. Becca Call is our executive producer. I'm Fitz Call, and you've been listening to the Dirtbag Diaries. Thanks for tuning in.